Welcome to another session of our study in Romans, the book of Romans in the New Testament. And if you recall, if you were following, you remember that I mentioned the Pax Romana. One thing I failed to include in that was the emperor of Rome who most strongly was the leader that helped bring in the Pax Romana was Caesar Augustus or Octavian. He was the nephew of Julius Caesar, and he came from a noble family in Rome, and he ruled the empire for almost 40 years, if I'm not mistaken. But at any rate, he really did all kinds of work throughout the empire, establishing colonies, establishing uh, centers of culture and commerce and art and architecture. And he built a lot of temples and, you know, statuary and all that. And so he was very prolific, you might say, in that sense of exporting or transplanting or bringing about the Roman way of things throughout the known world. It was a very massive kind of project that he engaged in. He did fight a few battles. The Pax Romana wasn't always. There was a one year that there was civil war, but you can read the Roman history. Just look up history of the Roman Empire or a reign of Caesar Augustus or what have you, and you'll get all the information. Now, Caesar Augustus or Octavian, he was the emperor that is mentioned in the Gospel of Luke for the birth of Jesus. So that's just a little more background to the way the world was when Jesus and Paul were living, were alive on the earth. Now, another thing we want to talk about in our studies of this chapter is the idea that the first chapter, or at least the first passage of the first chapter, verses 1 through 17, is about the gospel. Paul wants to make an emphatic statement in verses 16 and 17 that describe his entire thesis for the book, which is, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." I don't know if I've quoted that exactly, but I have a translation I'd like to read of that as well. Um, but there's many things about the gospel that may or not be familiar to you. Um, the gospel is the power of God, is the power of his resurrection. Without the resurrection, there is no gospel. A lot of people assume that the gospel is about Jesus dying on the cross. Well, that's only part of the story. But the whole meta narrative, the whole narrative of the Bible culminates in the arrival of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, and his death and resurrection. And the story of Jesus, the story of his death and resurrection, that particular work that Christ did is what is known as the gospel, the good news. The good news that God came and made the sacrifice for our sins so that we could be reconciled to God and brought back into fellowship that he had originally had established with Adam and Eve before they fell. So I have a lot of notes here. I'm looking through them. I don't want to miss anything. There's so much information. This particular passage, verses 16 and 17, and the first chapter of Romans has been very much. There's a lot of information available, but I gave you that bibliography to start with to help you see some of that stuff that was available. Hang on a second. Let me run through my notes here. Oh, okay. The word gospel is a word from the Middle Ages. It's a contraction or abbreviation of the words Godspell, and that's how they said it when they meant the good news of the Bible or the New Testament. But the Greek word is euangelion, and euangelion was the word used in the Koine Greek language, which was the language of the educated in the empire, that was announcing the good news that the leader or Lord had defeated his enemies, and that we could be free, or the people could be free as a result of the deliverance of the leader, of the conqueror, the emperor or general or what tribune or whatever it might be. So another word we need to be aware of in our study is the word salvation. The word salvation in the Greek language is soterion, and it's a verb that often appears in a meaning in the Greek. The way the verbs are conjugated, there's a past, present, and future aspect to the action of the verb. So when it says that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes, well, that power is past, present, future action of our being redeemed, our spirit, soul, and body, and we were saved, we are saved, and we will be saved. So if you think of it that way, it's kind of like a threefold tense of the verb. But let me read to you this translation of these two verses from one of the commentaries that I was using, a guy named Longenecker in the New International Greek New Testament commentary, which is available. They're kind of expensive, but I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God with respect to the salvation of everyone who believes, both for the Jew first and for the Gentile. For in it, the righteousness of God is being revealed, a righteousness that is based and leads to or results in, based on divine faithfulness and leads to or results in a human responsive faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by his faith. So there's a lot there. The word righteous, the righteousness of God. What does that mean? That phrase. What does the power of God? We've already mentioned that, discussed that a little bit. Living by faith or by his faith. These were the words that inspired Luther when he had his revelation or his transformation of his mind. His mind was challenged by the hope of the gospel, and it caused him to want to be the leader that he was. So several leaders throughout history, church history, have been inspired by these verses in Romans. Augustine, Luther, Aquinas, a few others, maybe Calvin to some extent, although Calvin has a whole new, different sort of approach. So anyway, like I said, I have all these notes, and I'm trying to bring out as much as I can. It's hard to read my notes on the computer while the camera is on. Okay, no, well, that's enough of that. Just a couple more things I want to mention. So, the book of Romans has a lot of different ideas, themes, doctrines. It would be an exhaustive list if we went through all of them. But as we go along reading and studying this book, we will find that chapters 2 and 3 demonstrate the sinfulness of mankind. Chapters 4 and 5 are a rephrasing of the message of the gospel. Chapters 6, 7, and 8 are the benefits and the rewards of following the gospel. And 9, 10, and 11 are, as I said before, sort of departure from the main themes to the theme of the relationship of the Jews. But it's still about the gospel. The whole epistle is about the gospel. And then chapters 12 through 16 are the practical recommendations or exhortations, so that not only would they know what they believe, but be able to live it out in a practical way. So there's that, and there's several things about the verses 16 and 17 that I want to mention. For example, the word group righteousness and just. The righteous will live by his faith. The just will live by his faith. Does that mean that the faith is what keeps him alive, or that he is living by that standard? There's that question of which way to see that phrase, and then there's the question of the righteousness of God, which we've already mentioned before. That's a word group that is very much akin to the word the just or justice. It's the same word group. It's the same basic root word. And then in the way of that, the word faith relates to the word believe. Believe is the verb, is the action, and faith is the the thing. So there's that as well. And what else? The power of the gospel is such that it cannot be limited in any way. It's power beyond power, the power of God. And then there's the whole issue of to the Jew first and also to the Greek or Gentile. Paul would always go to the synagogue first on his missionary journeys and preach in the synagogue, and if he acquired any converts there, then there would be also some Gentile, what they call proselytes, or people who became of the faith of Judaism, even though they weren't born into it. Most of the Jews were born into it, but there were a lot of Jewish people who had adopted Judaism as a religion, as a faith, as a culture, and they followed the ways of Moses. So Paul would minister to that group first, and then he would branch out into the Gentile communities. And so there's that. And what I was going to say, Paul's being ashamed. Why does he say he was not, I am not ashamed of the gospel? It wasn't that he was embarrassed about it. It was that, in the same sense that Jesus said, if you confess me before men, my Father I will confess you before my Father in heaven. And so it's that kind of shame that in our daily lives, we are to be a reflection of the gospel so that others can come into the kingdom of God. And to be ashamed of it is not the right attitude to have. If you're embarrassed that people can intimidate you and silence you and tell you that you're just a hypocrite and all the negative things the world has to say about people who follow the faith of Christianity. So that's point, I don't need to belabor it too much because it's pretty obvious, but there are some nuances to this whole question of whether, or not, or what Paul's reason was for saying that I am not ashamed. But at any rate, that's the best I can do for you for um, chapter one. And I'm trying to compile these videos so that they're understandable to the average person, but as well as find people of more mature faith, you might say, for them as well to be of benefit to them as well. So we'll get into the second part of chapter one next week, and that will involve verses 18 through 32. And it's some pretty serious stuff, but I believe that we can come to a what you might call an approach that will be able to um, straighten out a lot of misconceptions that people have about the whole reason for the seriousness of that passage. So anyway, do your best to study and keep abreast of what's going on, and we'll come back next week. Thank you. Bye.